I had a few questions lined up for today and then read an article in the newspaper on Friday and kind of had me change my direction. So Spotlight PA ran a story highlighting wasted tax credits that were not used for their intended purpose. And as the chair of the Senate Communications and Technology Committee, I will tell you that one of our goals, both the Democratic and Republican members, is closing the state's digital divide. We're seeing nearly every industry relying on a high-speed internet connection. One of the questions that we keep coming back to is how we increase access to high-speed internet for all Pennsylvanians across the state. So we have regulatory burdens, we need incentives, and there's been the question of public financing. So your comments, Mr. Knittel, really caught my attention, and you said, I quote, "The greatest bang for the buck is when the investment is going to an underserved area." However, you also said that 90% of what was spent would have happened regardless of that tax credit. The story then went on to say that companies received over $12 million in the last 5 years for investments in places that already had high-speed internet. So if it wasn't deploying broadband, do you know what these tax credits were actually used for?
Yeah, so we did a report that was just published in January, part of the tax credit review process that looked at the mobile telecom broadband investment tax credit. And we did find, as part of that, that the investments appeared to be going in places that already have broadband, that it was just for upgrades, for faster service, and that it did not appear that they were going to rural communities. But there was nothing to enforce that it didn't have to occur in a rural area. So our recommendation was that the firms, if they're going to take the tax credit, they should report where the investment is incurring. And we also recommended that instead of a tax credit, that be a grant program, a competitive grant program to make it more efficient. But yes, the biggest bang for the buck is in the rural area that's underserved or not served.
Okay, and so in your opinion then, after reviewing that and making those recommendations, do you believe that that economic activity would have happened regardless of whether those tax credits were provided?
For this particular tax credit, yes, we think the majority of those expenditures would have been made regardless. We thought 90%.
And the changes that you recommend, do you need statutory change to make those things happen?
I do believe they would require statutory change for the competitive grant program, yes.
So in order to make your job easier and taxpayer dollars spent more wisely, the General Assembly needs to act.
That is correct. If they want to change, yes, that's correct.
Okay. Clearly we've made some good changes in terms of the fiscal code, giving you more oversight over those tax credits. But it sounds like we need to take additional steps. Does the Commonwealth have any recourse at this point with regard to this money not being spent the way it was originally intended?
At this point, to my knowledge, no, but again, it wasn't laid out in statute that they had to put it into a rural area. So I think if that's made explicit, then one could have recourse in order to enforce that.
Okay, great. And do you have every tool that you need to review these tax credit programs for our future success?
We do. I would say we do have tools. What we are lacking is data. So for many of these tax credits, there is insufficient data. Again, I point to the KIS, where there's tremendous potential here from partnering with educational institutions. But we're not sure what happens to these firms once they come out of this program. Are they viable? Do they survive? How many people do they employ? Those are the questions we can't answer. So we recommend more reporting and verification.
Thank you. Every year, there are several members of the General Assembly who say that certain special funds should be moved into the general fund as a way to save interest payments, right? To reduce our debt. We have ever-increasing interest payments. Has your office conducted an analysis on how the Commonwealth could reduce its debt in order to reduce its interest payments?
No, we have not undertaken that type of analysis where we could minimize the debt payments and what would bring that about.
Very good. And one final question, if I may. It deals with overspending, and over the last years, there have been cost overruns within the state budget. That amount gets put into a supplemental, and I think it creates a dishonest picture for the current fiscal year. I've proposed a constitutional amendment that would end that practice. As someone who analyzes our budget and provides an outlook, how does your office account for what is seeming to be these annual cost overruns?
So, well, when we do our projections, both our 5-year projections and shorter-term ones, we do try to look at the projections of the expenditures very closely. If they seem overly aggressive, we try to build into our estimates in order to take that into account. Or if we know there's some payment delay or roll forward, we also try to take that into consideration. We don't have full information, so I won't claim that it's entirely accurate, but we do attempt to do that.
So when all said and done, and we account for what's been appropriated, what the governor's overspent, the supplementals, deficit spending, shifting, transfers, all of that, how far off are your budget projections usually? Do you track that?
We do. I mean, we do track them in that we put out an annual estimate every year, and then the actual then comes out. I can say that every year we do usually have a deficit projected, and then when, of course, the budget has to be balanced in some manner, either with additional revenues or by payment delays. One thing that we've continually built in is the spending for PlanCon, for example. We assume that would be taken care of on the budget, but that's now been moved off the budget. So that's one of those issues that we continually project, but then it's addressed in a different manner.